Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Moshe. I'm an Israeli born and raised in Sderot on the Israel-Gaza border. I'm currently based in New York, where I moved to in September of last year. I will share with you my family's story in the next couple of minutes. Share with you who Omri, my brother-in-law, is, and conclude with the advocacy work the families of hostages have been doing tirelessly over the past 10 months, and how you can still support us in that work. And then I would open it for questions if any of you has anything to share, thoughts or questions. So let me start with Omri. Omri was born and raised in northern Israel, in Kibbutz Yesod HaMa'ala, to a beautiful family. He moved to the south, where my family is based, about a decade ago, where he met my sister Lishai in March 2020. A few days before the lockdown, they attended a Purim party and fell in love from first sight. And because of the pandemic, we got to know Omri very well, because if you recall, we had to spend time only with a very limited number of people during that time period. And Omri became part of our family, and in September 22, got married to Lishai, and they brought to this world two beautiful daughters, Roni and Alma. Roni will celebrate her third birthday in 3 days. Alma marked her first birthday in April. Sadly, both of them will not have celebrated it with their father, Omri. Omri is a shiatsu therapist and a gardener in Kibbutz Nachal Oz. We love to say that he heals people in his clinic and heals plants, flowers, nature when he works the soil in the kibbutz. He's a lover of nature, lover of really humanity, very peace-loving person, connected to the spiritual tenets of Judaism, but also to Eastern cultures through his travel in the Far East and his teaching as a therapist, shiatsu therapist, which is Japanese healing practice. He enjoys watching sports, and luckily he supports our family's team. Otherwise it would have been much more difficult to be with him during the pandemic. His favorite author is Haruki Murakami. He has all his books in the library in the kibbutz. And he's a free-spirited person, has a charming smile. And he was taken from us on October 7. On that morning, my entire family was subjugated to the attacks. I left Israel on September 7th, so a month before the attack. I was with my family, and I could not have imagined how things will change so quickly and so drastically within a month. On that morning, my parents were in Sderot. They were sheltering. Sderot was attacked by terrorists throughout the city, but luckily they were repelled eventually with heavy cost of both civilians who were murdered and police officers who were killed in duty. My other sister, Michal, and her family were in Kibbutz Oraner, very close to Sderot. They were sheltering as well. And like my parents, survived and did not witness the worst of what happened, both in Oraner's area, vicinity, and in Sderot. But for my sister Lishai and Omri in Kibbutz Nachal Oz, things were very different. The sirens started at 6:29. Within seconds, rockets started falling in the kibbutz and in its vicinity. Lishai and Omri took Ronnie and Alma to the safe room in the house, and they were sheltering there for a few hours. I was in New York then, starting my night. It was a Friday night. I was in a club and started getting the messages from my family, from my friends, who were all sheltering those moments. At first, I didn't pay attention to it because only rocket attacks were reported. And while I say only because for twisted reasons, we normalize living under rocket attacks. And so being bombarded by rockets was not something unique that you need to worry about too much. That is part of the failures that led to October 7, when we as citizens allowed our governments to normalize this sort of reality for 2 decades, since I was a kid. I was talking to my family through WhatsApp. They said they're all right, they're sheltering. Asked them to report me every 15 minutes as I headed back to my flat. But at some point we lost contact with Lishai and Omri. And we were able to re-establish contact only 10 hours later. Around 10:30 a.m., Hamas terrorists broke into their home in Kibbutz Nachal Oz. They used a teenage boy from the kibbutz, Tomer, to lure them to open the door. Tomer was used throughout the kibbutz that day. And Lishai and Omri, of course, opened the door to save his life. But later Tomer was murdered by Hamas terrorists. He was 17 years old. His mother was murdered, and his mother's partner was murdered. And his 2 half-siblings were kidnapped and later released in November in the previous deal. So the terrorists entered Lishai and Omri's home. They ravaged it, abused them, held them at gunpoint, woke up my baby niece, Roni, with a gun pointed at her face. She was sleeping in the safe room. They refused to let my sister Lishai go and grab her and wake her up and bring her to where they were held captive in the living room, and instead took Tomer and woke her up with a gun pointed at her face. 2.5 years old then. You can imagine what sort of trauma that will bring to her. After a few hours, they took Lishai, Omri, and the girls to a different home, their neighbors, the Idan family, whose eldest daughter, Mayan, was murdered that morning. She just celebrated her 18th birthday. They were held captive there for hours. It was live streamed on Facebook. They took the phone of Gali Idan, the mother of the Idan family, used her Facebook account, and live streamed it to her friends and family to see what they're doing. We were not aware of it at the time, but we saw the footage later. Eventually, around 1:30 p.m., they told Omri and Tzachi Dan and 2 additional women who were brought to the house, Judith and Natalie Ranan, to get up. They handcuffed them and told them they're taking them. My sister Lishai told me she loves him, that she'll take care of the girls and ask him not to be a hero. And that was the last time she saw him. Ronnie tried to run to her father, but luckily my sister Lishai stopped her. We know what Hamas terrorists and their accomplices did that day to children, and so we're lucky that Lishai stopped her, because who knows what it would have done to her. Omri was taken then. They took cars from the kibbutz and drove to Gaza. That was the last time she saw him, last time we heard from him. For the next couple of hours, they were left in their house, still guarded from the outside. The kibbutz was still burning. There were massacres taking place. A greater tragedy could have happened, but for some reason they played a Russian roulette in the kibbutz and chose random people to murder, random people to kidnap, and random people to just leave behind, spare their life. Around 5:30 p.m., so 11 hours after the attack started, only then the IDF reached Nahal Oz. 11 hours in a country as small as Israel. But Omri was long taken then. My sister was rescued with my nieces, and that night my mother received a Facebook message that they were rescued, and we were able to reestablish connection the following day, when also my parents and my other sister and her family were rescued from their homes. This is only one story from October 7, and to be honest, we were relatively lucky. But lucky means you have a hostage in your family, that your entire family is displaced, that people in your family experienced trauma, heard the screams, the gunshots, felt vulnerable in their own home, in their own region, their own country, in ways they never felt before. And so since October 7, we started as families of hostages to advocate for their release. Within a day, families opened the Hostages and Missing Families Forum, which is known abroad as Bring Them Home. Within a day, we set up an organization and started advocating in Israel and in other relevant places around the world, primarily the US, Europe, and even with regional stakeholders that are involved with the negotiations. We're doing tremendous diplomatic work that we were not trained for. We met everyone you can imagine, including this week in Washington, D.C., as our Prime Minister was giving a speech. And we try to make sure that the elected officials in the US, no matter their affinity, try and hold him somewhat accountable and push him for agreeing to the deal that bears his name, because he proposed it about a month and a half ago. Beyond the diplomatic, political work we do, we of course go to communities, whether in Israel or around the world, trying to share our stories, trying to make sure people remember and make sure people are mobilized. And we do it through events like this, through social media, where families are active and trying to humanize the hostages. And I advise you, if you use Instagram, for example, or your children or grandchildren, tell them to search for hostages pages. If you simply write "bring him home," you'll find countless pages for people like Omri that we set up to humanize them, to share their story through videos, through text, through our interviews to the media, whether in Israel or internationally. And of course, we continue to fundraise to support us as an organization. We continue to fundraise to support the families as well, because that organization also provides social, psychological, and material support for many families, especially those like ours who are from the Gaza envelope, the northwestern Negev, to make sure that they are being supported in ways the government is unable to support, or too short of funds to support. So I would advise you as well, if you can, to try and look for ways to support materially the Hostages and Missing Family Forum, supporting kibbutzim like Nachal Oz, which are being rebuilt these days after they were partially destroyed or completely destroyed, like Kibbutz Nir Oz or Kibbutz Kfar Aza, Kibbutz Be'eri, or support directly families who need to now handle both the advocacy work and, of course, dealing with the trauma, either of being captive themselves, seeing their loved ones being taken, losing family members, losing friends, neighbors, communities. So I would advise to support there as well. And of course, to continue and see how you can engage your communities, your colleagues on this issue. It's so important that we keep talking about the hostages, and you learn about one hostage here today. There's countless others you can learn about. Still 115 held captive after 5 bodies were recovered this week. There are events, I understand, in Toronto every Sunday like we do in New York. And of course, I encourage you to organize whether virtual or in-person events to learn more about a way to advocate, to hear more stories, to expose beyond the Jewish community, which is another thing we're trying to do. We've done tremendous work in the US, reaching out to Christian communities, to Muslim communities, and trying to forge alliances on the issue of the hostages, irrespective of political opinions about the rest of issues that plague our region and this specific conflict. So with that, I'll open it to questions or comments. If you have, and don't be shy, I'm Israeli, you can say, be blunt and direct. I'm not going to get offended.
If you have any questions, put up your hand and I'll play Oprah.
And it could be about any topic, whether advocacy work or anything else.
Hi. I'm not sure if you answered. Is your sister, is she still in Israel? Are they still there?
Yes, we are Israelis.
I know.
I'm in the US just because I have a work visa after graduating business school. Yes, all my family's in Israel. I was there. I had to go back. But then I returned to the US. They're in a kibbutz called Kramim, which is hosting them for the time being. They're displaced there. They were displaced there since the second day of the war. And they're trying as much as possible to support them. But yeah, obviously it's been tough for myriad of reasons. But we have that at least.
You mentioned that you're reaching out to various organizations, political, religious, or otherwise. What's your success rate been in reaching out and encompassing the Muslim community in the United States? I know here it's very silent. We only hear the protests, encampments. We don't hear anybody supporting the release of the hostages. There might be one or two in the newspaper. Once in a while you hear. But what has your success rate been like in joining forces on this particular humanitarian cause?
I think it's been a challenge. We don't quantify things, so I can't tell you the success rate. We managed to hold some common prayers with Muslim communities in DC or in New York, or this sort of kind of gatherings where we share the stories. We also managed to speak behind closed doors with relevant leaders of organizations. And we're also engaging with actors in the region that are supportive in the way they can be. But it's obviously not large scale as I would say the Christian community in the US or other communities. It's a challenge, and I think it's a reckoning that the Muslim communities need to do, because they're not self-critical enough, in my opinion, in ways that some other communities are a bit more. I will say though that this week when I was in DC, there were two special people came to some of our events to show solidarity with us, the families of hostages. And two of them are Gazans who live in the US and have been, they're critical of Israel and its policies, but also critical of Hamas, and are being brave voices in the US and brave voices of support for the families of hostages. So I can tell you that at least in an individual level, we were able to touch some hearts and create some alliances. But there's so much work to do there, and I think that work will have to continue after this crisis throughout the world. We're not in a good place in terms of interfaith alliances, and I'm not sure it's the Jewish community's fault. I don't think it is.
Shalom, Moshe. Thank you for being here, and thank you for telling us your story and Emily's story. I came here actually to meet you and invite you. You're talking about initiatives to raise awareness about the hostages. So I'm involved with Run for Their Lives. Every Sunday, you probably heard about it from Avi, at Promenade. I wanted to invite you tomorrow, and since I'm here, extend the invitation to everyone in this community as well. That's it.
Yeah, I will be joining tomorrow. We hold it in New York as well. And just so you know, there are 90 chapters of the Hostages Families Forum across the world, and they organize events like Run for Their Lives or support that started as an individual initiative but became part of the forum's initiatives. But it all grew from individuals who were so passionate about raising awareness. So I would encourage everyone to think about ways to bring it to your community, to your home, to your workplace. I spoke in several places like Bank of America, like JP Morgan, where we come and share it with senior members of our organization, so that they will understand that this is not a political issue, but a humanitarian issue, multi-faith issue, because they're hostages of several religions, multinational issue, hostages of many different nationalities, and engage in ways that the private sector can to support us, the families.
I just wanted to, in regard to the question that was asked, even here in Toronto, there are a lot of initiatives that are being done. As you just said, you have Run for the Lives that's happening every Sunday in 3 different places in Toronto, one in the beaches, one in Eglinton area, one in the Promenade. Every Sunday between 12 and 2 p.m., you have at the corner of Butters and Shepherd the marvelous thing that's happening there every week as well. Other initiatives that we have been doing as One Global Voice, we've made many events for the hostages. We've made events for the 100-day, for the 6 months. Now, a few weeks ago, we made an event, a big event also for the 9 months on July 7, always in downtown Toronto. We're trying not to hide and show all the beautiful faces that we have in downtown Toronto. Regarding other communities. We have been involved with other communities. Tomorrow we have two events that together with Moshe, one of them in Toronto Zionist Council, we will have people from the Hindu community, people from the Iranian community, people from the Christian community. In the afternoon at 6:30, we're going to, Moshe will be speaking at a Filipino church, a Christian Filipino church in Scarborough. So there's a lot of efforts that have been putting also for other communities. I just came back from a trip with another hostage family member that was here, Yasmin, that was speaking about Omer Mitra. Together with her, we traveled to Calgary and Vancouver. We met with a lot of MPs, MPPs. We spoke with indigenous people, with lots of different communities, and everybody was always very, very receptive and showing their support and solidarity with us. So there's lots of things happening.
Just a quick question. You mentioned that you would like us all to be part of advocacy, workplaces, outside in the world, in the non-Jewish community, the larger community. Do you see us all being the Esthers of today's life? Do you see us being ambassadors of Israel and of this cause of returning the hostages? And would you also turn your focus on trying to somehow combat that media war that I think we've lost to the Palestinians or to the Arab media war that they've created, and they managed to convince the entire population that we are wrong and they're right. I think that media war that Israel did not really invest in is a key for all of us to go in the real world and put ourselves out there. Many people might be afraid for their jobs and for their safety. It is not an easy thing, and you are a hero. You're going around and you are promoting this cause. But do you really think we should make that effort? And do you think that you and people like you who work in big advocacy can somehow help us with the media?
I'll start by saying yes, you all should be ambassadors of our cause, whether in your communities, whether when writing to your elected officials. You live in a democracy, and at least in the US, we encourage people to keep writing, sending emails, and call their elected officials' offices. We also urge the Jewish organization in the US, I'm going to be very honest here, to stop using families of hostages as props for their asbara and call for a deal in order to save their lives. If you prioritize the hostages, that's the only viable way to bring them home. So we also say that, when I'm being honest here, we've made some strides over the past week with AJC, but there are other Jewish organizations like the ADL who remain very silent on the issue of the hostages, and we'll keep calling them out because they prioritize political alliances with specific politicians in Israel over the lives of the hostages. When it comes to media and social media, this is an individual decision. I believe, again, as a citizen of democratic nations, to exercise our rights and keep writing and bothering media outlets when they do something wrong, in our opinion, to correct them, whether on their pages, on Twitter, and there are now something called community notes, and we've been utilizing that to correct media outlets who have been portraying things wrongly, or by simply writing letters to the editor, and keep bombarding them with emails. That's one way to do it. And of course, those who can be active on social media, be vocal. Don't be afraid of being vocal. I'm very outspoken everywhere I can, whether when writing op-eds or writing on social media or interviewing everywhere I can, including in places like El Arabiya, which is a state Saudi channel that gave me 50 minutes to share the issue of the hostages, but we talked about other things like Zionism and the broader conflict. So use your voice. You are living in a democracy. If you'll be too afraid to use your voice and let others intimidate you, then we lose. I don't know whether we'll win the media battle or not. To be honest, I'm focusing on bringing home my brother-in-law and all the hostages. For me, that's the first priority above anything else. But we will have to keep working hard after this dreadful war ends to make sure the voice of Israel, voice of Zionism, voice of the Jewish people is not silent. And I hope this will be an awakening for dormant communities around the world who were too afraid to voice their voice. Remain silent behind the shadows. It's time to rise up and to the challenge that other communities are giving us, and ensure to hold our politicians accountable. I hold my politicians in Israel accountable. Families of hostages hold them accountable, and we'll keep doing that in order to pursue what we believe is correct, but this needs to be done all around the world. In an ideal world, in October 8th, every member state of the United Nations would have sent their head of state to stand on the Israel-Gaza border and demand Hamas to release the hostages and surrender and leave the Gaza Strip instead of sacrificing Gazans for their maniacal and genocidal plan to destroy the state of Israel. So hold your politicians accountable. That's all we can do. We may not win, but we'll know we tried our best.
I have a question for you. This week we heard our Prime Minister of Israel was invited by Congress to the United States and gave what I thought was a very, very moving speech on the present state of Israel. A lot of it was deja vu. He took in a history of our people. We always have to bleed and be killed and have problems before anybody recognizes us. I have two questions. I wonder, when the Congress invited Netanyahu, our best friend, quote, to come and talk, why the president wasn't there and why the vice president wasn't there. I thought it was a tremendous act of disrespect that neither of them was present for his talk. The second question is, I immediately phoned my son in Israel who lives in Ramat Bet Shemesh, and I said, Danny, wasn't that a brilliant talk? And I'm crying because it meant so much to me. And he said, Mom, we got to get rid of him. I said, Danny, what more can he do to get these people out? You're dealing with Chayas. You're not dealing with Mention. He said, Mom, he's not doing enough. And as soon as he gets out, as quickly as he gets out, there will be others there who can take over and do what has to be done. It'll cost lives, but it's the only way to get them out. I would like your comments, please.
To the president, to my knowledge, presidents needs to be invited to attend Congress because it will be a violation of separation of the legislature and the office of the president. He doesn't usually attend Congress unless he gives the State of the Union. The vice president had an event that was scheduled long before Mr. Netanyahu decided to invite himself through Speaker Mike Johnson to Congress. I don't believe she should have changed her schedule for him, and her deputy was there. Well, we all have different beliefs. Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a great speech. He's an amazing orator, would have been a wonderful foreign minister to the state of Israel, which doesn't have a foreign minister for so many years because of his administration, a proper one. For me, and I was present in the speech, and I made sure to look in his eyes as much as possible. Families also met him this week. He has not addressed and provided anything that is constructive or visionary to the issue of the hostages or to the broader conflict. Speaking slogans on that will not bring them home and will not change the dynamics in the region. Policy will. I hope policy will be implemented. I'm not going to comment about whether he should be or shouldn't be prime minister. He's the prime minister and will keep working with his government as long as the prime minister to make sure he understands that currently, according to all polls, between 65 to 70% of Israelis support the deal that is on the table. Had we spoken a month ago, and you can track on my interviews, I would have put the sole blame on Hamas for sacrificing their own people and not agreeing to the deal. But over the past 2 weeks, the chief of staff of the IDF, the head of the Mossad, the head of the Shin Bet, the Minister of Defense, all said that the conditions for a deal were met. In a meeting with the families this week, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, the conditions for a deal were ripened, but I want them to be more ripe. In a follow-up question, he said, I can't comment further. So I hope they will ripe, and I hope we won't miss another opportunity to bring them home. But that doesn't mean pausing this war now or ending it now does not mean the state of Israel stops fighting for its inalienable right to be an independent state and fighting against its enemies. Sadly, we'll keep on doing that. Hamas is a pawn in a game that is much larger than Hamas. It's a proxy of Iran, an entire axis of evil that includes even greater countries. But yeah, that's not something I'm dealing with right now. I'm not an elected official, and I'm sure the Jewish community will decide whether to hold VP Harris or not accountable, or other people will. I'm happy the Prime Minister met both the President with families, met the VP, and also met the nominee of the Republican Party, Donald Trump. So it's important that he will meet with all of them. And I can tell you that all three of them said this week that this war needs to end and that the hostages needs to return as soon as possible.
My question is more on a practical level. I know you have the two battles, the battle to get the hostages out. The other battle is the financial needs that you are facing. And I want to know what the communities are giving you financially. In Toronto, Federation has raised over $70 million just for this cause, not for the local needs. And I want to know, are you getting any of that money? Because if you aren't, we will lobby like mad to make sure you do.
For my knowledge, yes, whatever was donated to the Hostages and Missing Families Forum reaches the families. It reaches them in different ways, and I'll explain to you. It allows us to advocate. gives us budget to go around and advocate. We shouldn't do that, to be honest. I mean, why do I need to advocate for this? Like, I'm not a politician or a diplomat, but I do that. And it also gives us social support when needed, budget to create initiatives our own with our local communities. It gives psychological support, which is so important, and people underestimate how important it is. And allows us to have that operation. So it's a different kind of support level. So the money goes there, and I can tell you it goes for supporting us. If it was donated to the Hostages Farmers Forum, I don't know about other donations, but specifically for how the money is used by the forum, it's organization of the families. It's for the families. It's based mainly on volunteers. There are few people, because it got so prolonged, 10 months, there are few people who started getting salaries to run the operation, because we can't run it on our own. We're not all of us fit for that. And and on a family level, there are different kind of support system. But yeah, many families are still struggling because there's loss of income, loss of community, loss of jobs, loss of a house. And you have to be displaced and deal with all of that. While on top of that, you deal with mourning or advocating for your loved one. So the needs are endless, sadly, and in the world, the world is not great all the time. But we're doing our best with what we have. And thank you for your support and donations as a community. And I hope your wallet will continue to be able to donate. But I obviously understand that this is not always possible.
This is going to be our last question.
You've mentioned, and other people in the room have mentioned, reaching out to non-Jewish people about this issue. And you or others have spoken to some churches, but where is the hierarchy? Where is the Archbishop of Toronto been, for example, or the Archbishop of New York? Have they made any strong public statements about releasing the hostages?
I don't know about Toronto. I'm not from here, and it's the first time I've ever been in Toronto. I came for work and stayed for the weekend. Yes, in New York, yeah. Heads of churches, Archbishop Omri's father met the Pope in the Vatican. The Pope spoke about this specifically right after in his sermon to millions of people. I met the ambassador of the Vatican. There are people speaking up about the issue of the hostages. I want to stress that sometimes those people who speak for the issue of the hostages may say other things we disagree with. They may not be supportive of every narrative we have as Israelis, as Jews. But many people that we engage with, and we engage with people of different kind of, on different places on the political spectrum, for a reason, because otherwise, if we'll speak to only to our people, then it will be limited. Which is why families of hostages met elected officials who, in the US, for example, some of them are hostile to Israel. But for us, it was important that Ilan Umar will call for the release of the hostages and condemn Hamas for holding them. After that, she will say a lot of terrible things and gross statements about Israel. But we can't change everything ourselves. I think this is work that needs to be done by the state of Israel that is not doing enough in empowering its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, having an actual plan to reach out to communities abroad. Doesn't engage on campuses as much as it used to. And there's so much work to be done, but not enough work was done in the past decade or two. So we reached this low point, in my opinion. But yeah, we reach out to clerks, and if we reach the Pope, then it reached many others below him. I'll just end and say you can always reach out to the forum directly, and I'm sure you can reach out to Avi, who is based here, with ideas or with connections to people who could support, whether financially, whether politically, whether through their network. We reached through an individual initiative. I went to meet Robert Kraft and recruit him. He's one of the largest billionaires in the US, and recruit him for the issue of the hostages. For us, it's important because he has a direct line to both the Israeli Prime Minister and the Emir of Qatar. So if you have ideas like that, or even smaller, or if you want to have hostage families coming from New York, from other places in the US, from Israel, or virtually, reach out to Avi, reach out to the forum, and we'll make sure to set it up. Engage on social media. If you have an Instagram account, go to those hostages pages. Post one story a day. Engage your friends who are outside the echo chamber. And I studied abroad many years, so I have a lot of friends outside the echo chamber that I would have had in Israel, or for my service. I served for 6 years, etc. So I have a lot of people who may have been hostile to Israel had they not known things that I post. So use that power you have, or tell your children if you don't use social media, and yeah, engage wherever you can. It's really important. Yeah, thank you again for listening and giving such thoughtful questions and difficult questions. Thank you.
I want to thank you.